So if you're following along and no self, no problem, we're probably about page 9 or 10, and we left off on this idea that the brain lies. And it's not so much that the brain is lying, it's just an interpretive machine that gets it wrong a lot of the time. And so you can kind of think of the mind as this interpretive machine that's trying to figure out the world around us, and it just doesn't always get it right. So think about right now. One of the main sources of stress is that we're getting so many different types of information. Um, and the mind desperately wants a coherent, consistent story to try to explain what's going on in the world, and we're just not capable of getting it because there's just so much conflicting pieces of information. And so that itself is a great source of stress. But right now, for this video, I want to focus on arousal. So we have two different parts of the nervous system. We have what's called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So the sympathetic arouses us, it gets us ready for the fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic calms us down, kind of relax and digest. The issue is that sometimes when we're aroused, the mind looks out and it tries to explain what's going on, and it makes a mistake. It misattributes the arousal to something that isn't actually its source. And one of my favorite all-time studies is one that did this with roller coasters. So they looked at people when they got off a roller coaster. Now that's a very arousing kind of thing. And it turns out right after you get off a roller coaster, you're going to find someone else much more attractive than you would normally. And what's happening is this: the mind's looking out, your heart's beating fast, you're sweating because of the roller coaster ride. But you're looking out and you see this person who maybe you'd normally think they're okay attractive wise, but now you think they're very attractive. Now, the most interesting thing about the study is this only happened for people who were not in relationships. In other words, the mind is clever enough that it recognizes, well, you're already in a relationship, so how attractive that person is kind of irrelevant. So it's a pretty sophisticated interpretive machine. Now, the interesting thing about neuroscience and Buddhism is how um, non-moralistic they are. In other words, they're not telling you what you should or should not do. All they're doing is giving you the mechanics of how these systems work. And so the idea is if you get up in the morning and you start your day with 4 cups of coffee and then you turn on the news, you are very likely going to put yourself in a situation where the mind is going to make one of these mistakes of misattributed arousal. In other words, you may think that you're completely freaked out, and it's the effects of the caffeine and sugar. Some people actually start their day with sugar and caffeine, so that's going to crank up that sympathetic arousal. And any kind of news or information you subject the mind to may very well misattribute it to that information as opposed to its original source. Now, again, you can do that if you want. In other words, if you want to go do some lines of cocaine and then binge watch the Saw movies, you can do this. But you're going to find yourself as this trembling, like, life-size Jenga machine that's about ready to crumble. So no one's telling you to do this or not do this. It's simply outlining the mechanics of it. Now, if you don't want to be in this state of anxiety, I'm going to give you one of the very best breathing exercises that I've come across in probably 20 or 30 years. And I share this with my classes, and it's a great way to get the parasympathetic nervous system kicked in rather than the sympathetic nervous system. So it's to get that calm, relax, and digest system kicking in. Now, if you take your pulse and you notice your breathing, you'll notice that when you breathe in, your pulse speeds up a little bit, and when you breathe out, it slows down. So this is a way to kind of activate the parasympathetic by breathing out and the sympathetic by breathing in. So the exercise is simply called 4-7-8. And it's super easy, and I get the most comments on this because people tell me how effective it is. And it doesn't really matter how fast you go. All you have to do is keep the ratio, because if you do it correctly, what you're doing is you're doubling your out breath compared to your in breath. So you breathe in for 4, hold for 7, and then out for 8. And like I said, you can go faster with this. It's just making sure that however fast the count is, it's just you're breathing in for 4 and then breathing out for 8. And if you want, you can kind of skip the middle part. I've seen some versions of it where you're holding it for 7, and then others where you just breathe in for 4 and then you breathe out for 8. And in some places, they even warn you that this is such a powerful mechanism to kick in your parasympathetic nervous system that you should only do a few at a time. And so I've done them, 4 or 5 in a row, and it's a really nice way to kind of feel that parasympathetic system kick in. And the whole point is you decrease the arousal, you're going to make it far less likely that you'll end up in one of these situations where you'll misattribute that arousal because it won't be there to begin with. So if you give the 4-7-8 a try, I'd really appreciate it. Let me know what you think, and let me know how it works for you.